We'll enter it for the record, Mr. President.
Sounds great.
Is dated March 21st, 2023, to whom it may concern. Should the City of Bossier City enter into a cooperative endeavor agreement with the Port Commission, with the commission bonding the cost of said project, said agreement would not result in any debt being assessed to the city as per the CEA. The city is not responsible for the payment of said bonds. The debt is the sole responsibility of the commission, with the city having the responsibility to make payments to the port after the city's production and treatment costs are satisfied. Said payment to the commission is capped at the commission's debt service. However, the commission is solely responsible for the bonded indebtedness. And it's signed by Jared Tinsley, partner from Hurd McElroy and Vestral LLC.
Okay.
Mr. President, if I may, there were some concerns that had been voiced, and I think there's some information floating around from various sources that the city of Bossier City is responsible for the payments on this $35 million, proposed $35 million in bonds. That is simply not true. That is not the case. The port is going to, the bonds will be issued by the commission, by the port. This is a revenue sharing agreement. That is, once the city's overhead costs are paid, then any additional revenue will be divided, or income will be divided equally between the city and the port on 50-50 basis. If the 50% reaches the port's debt service, then that 50% that goes to the port is capped, and then the city keeps 100% of any revenue or income derived after that. So overhead paid first, split 50-50 up to the port's debt service, I think it's calculated on a quarterly basis, and the city maintains that. If the port's 50% does not equal their debt service, then the city does not have to make up the difference. We are not responsible for that.
Thank you, Mr. Jacobs.
So right here, it's Charles, not to be crazy or dumb like I usually am. Said payment to the commission is capped at the commission's debt service.
Correct.
Or whatever that payment is,
That's it.
that's it. But we don't know what that is right now, do we? Of course not.
Mr. President, while we're on this subject, the debt obligation has been probably my biggest concern. And it was stated at the last workshop that we had, because I brought up the question of the line in the agreement that says, I don't have it on. Anyway, that said that, you know, Bossier City's payments shall not be less than. Mr. Jacobs explained to me that that was only in the event of prepayment of debt.
Correct.
And so, and then Mr. Rauschenbach also confirmed that for me when me and him were speaking privately. However, at that last workshop, Mr. England had made the comment, and I just want to get clarity on it. And it says, quote, you know, we've stated in here, we, the Caddo Bossier Port, do not seek to profit off of this endeavor. Let's establish that, number one. Number two, though, what we are asking for, as long as it takes even beyond the term of the bonds, if for whatever reason we do not recruit enough industry in the first 30 years to generate 3 million gallons of water per day, we're saying if it requires Bossier City payments to the port beyond us retiring the debt, that we are just made whole. So my question is the spirit of the agreement that we will make every payment until the bond is paid off, even if that happens after the 30-year bond is retired by the port?
Eric England, 6,000 Doug Attaway Boulevard, Shreveport, Louisiana, 71115. Councilman, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to be here this afternoon.
Thank you.
With regard to I guess the question that's been asked of me, I know what's in the agreement, and I would rather not comment as to what is in the agreement. I'd rather you direct those to your counsel and ask for his opinion on that. As to the spirit of the agreement, yes, that's what we have said from the onset, is that what we are asking for is no profit out of this deal, but for the debt service to be covered. And for example, in the early years of our agreement with the city of Shreveport, when we issued the initial debt in the mid-1990s, there was a deficit between the revenue and the debt service. And those amounts were calculated. And just as soon as the revenue exceeded the debt service, the city of Shreveport paid that money back that was in arrears. And in a very short period of time, everybody was made whole. And now, all the money that we receive from the city of Shreveport is the amount for debt service. So yes, in the spirit of the agreement, we do not want a profit. We would like to see that the city of Bossier pay us the debt service. However, as a result of the last work session, the council asked your general counsel to change the term of the agreement from 99 years to 40 years, which we did. So now, in terms of that, if you sever the agreement at 40 years or a time thereafter, you also sever your obligation to that debt, and that'll be the responsibility of the port.
Very good, thank you.
Chris, you done?
I'm done.
Eric, and I know you asked this question last time, I'm gonna ask it again. Let me say, located at or near the river port complex, other facilities currently being developed by the commission, including users of public facilities. What do public facilities mean?
If you could direct that to your general counsel.
Okay.
Since it is in the contract, I would just rather not get into the legalities and the terms, or whether they're terms of art, but to direct that to your attorney, if you don't mind.
What section are you in?
We're on the first page,
Okay.
down there, second paragraph from the bottom.
Okay.
Could you repeat the reference, please?
Second paragraph from the bottom, first page.
All right. The commission's tenants, industries, businesses, and other entities located or to be located at or near and other facilities currently being developed by the commission, including users of public facilities. Is that what the?
Yeah, what are public facilities, yes.
Well, it's my understanding that the port is talking about its tenants. If I'm not mistaken, the commission's tenants, industries, businesses, and other entities located or to be located at or near the Riverport complex and other facilities currently being developed by the commission, including users of public facilities. So that would include any private industry, any public-type industry, any tenant that takes advantage of publicly supplied services, things of that nature. Those would be the users.
Yeah, but wouldn't those facilities be private facilities? I mean, am I just looking at it wrong? Instead of public facilities?
Including users of public facilities. Well, again, I don't know exactly how different tenants in the ports are structured, whether they have a public-private partnership that take advantage of certain public facilities provided by the port. I'm assuming that's what that's referencing to.
So public facilities could be construed as water mains that are constructed and owned by the port, per se. Traditionally, in the port's 4,000-acre complex that we own and operate, we have leased premises that the lessee occupies. It's traditional for us as the lessor, as the owner of the industrial park, to lay the industrial lines, water, sewer, natural gas, electric lines, whatever the case may be, to the lessee line, if you will, the property line, the leasehold line. And from that point, within the leased premises, it's the responsibility and at the cost and at the ownership of the private company. And that's been the model for us since the mid-90s, and it continues on today. We build the, if you want to call them trunk lines, or the major infrastructure lines, the 36, the 24, the 18-inch main lines, and then those smaller lines, those 6, 8-inch lines that go within the leased premises are the responsibility, and they are the responsibility of, and they are owned by the lessee, the customer, the private company.
Mr. England?
Sir.
You referenced that any thing we need to be interpreted in this document need to go to our attorney, right?
As it comes to, if we're discussing the legalities of the contract, I didn't want to speak as to that, especially with your general counsel present. I'm here to represent the port, to represent the cooperative endeavor that we look for this to be, but I'm not here to speak on to the legalities of the agreement. I feel that based on our last work session and the dialogue that we've received, that our general counsel, your general counsel, have worked well together in formulating the changes. And so with that regard, I just did not want to speak to the legalities of the agreement. Spirit of the agreement, all the rest of it, absolutely. But when it comes to actual definitions and things like that, that's not what I believe is my forte, and really what I can do for you today, especially in the presence of your general counsel.
Right. Yeah, that being said, I think it would have been advantageous to you if your counsel had been here, because he also was involved in the document being generated. So I think that does you a disservice, because it may be something we might want to ask, that the two of them may have a whole different interpretation. But Mr. Malone is not here, so just food for thought. Another council person have anything else to ask?
I would, Mr. President, if I may, and I should ask this a second ago when we were talking about the debt, but Mr. Jacobs, if we get to year 31 of this agreement, and I think it's safe to say none of us will probably be here at year 31 of this agreement, but if the council at that time chooses to cease payments to the port because the debt service has been fulfilled, could the city do that? Or would we, in the spirit of the agreement, even though it's not written in writing, would we be telling that council they must still make payments for those last 9 years?
Once the debt service of the port is satisfied, either through its regularly scheduled payments, the principal plus the interest, the city has no future obligation to share revenue with the port. At that point in time, that revenue becomes 100% to Bossier City. So, however, again, if there's existing debt, then, and the city is selling water to the port, then that revenue sharing agreement remains in effect.
And on the debt service part, would we not need to, if, let's say we decide to go take out, a bond to do a bunch of road projects, we would not need to disclose to the State Bond Commission that we have this debt obligation?
We do not have a debt obligation.
But as long as they're paying water, we're paying them money. So there is an obligation per se.
If we are supplying water, once our overhead costs are met, okay, our production, our delivery, our personnel, our treatment costs, once those expenses are satisfied, then if there's any money left over, then we keep 50% and the port keeps 50%, with the port's portion capped at their quarterly debt service. Okay. However, this is an enterprise fund, all right? And so road projects, bonded indebtedness, one does not affect the other. So again, the debt is not on our books because we are not responsible for the debt. If we're making money, then we're responsible for reimbursing the port for their debt service up to capped at the maximum amount of their debt service. We have no obligation other than that. if the 50% that we owe the port does not reach their amount of debt service, then the port has to make up that difference. So a road project, or any other, if we need to bond any other projects, as per the letter from our auditor, this is not debt on our books. It would not affect the city's financial condition, one shape, form, or fashion.
That's the question I was asking. There you go. Thank you.
Even if we needed to buy anything for the water plant, since it's a water agreement, still wouldn't affect it?
No, would not.
So, and I just want to make sure I'm clear. I'm not trying to, these payments will not show up on our financials other than, as an obligation. So when we're being audited, they're not going to say, look, Bossier City has this looming 20 million, 30, however, whatever it is at the time. We don't have that.
That is correct. There is no minimum amount that we are obligated to pay. The only amount that we are obligated, should the city and should the port mutually agree, and they both have to agree, to make early payments on the debt, then whatever that early payment is, then as long as the city agrees to it first, then that would be a minimum payment that has to be made. However, that cannot be forced upon the city. The city and the port must agree to make an early payment. If that agreement is reached, if the city has appropriate revenue available to do that, then that has to equal the amount of whatever the agreed-upon early payment is.
All right, so another bubble question. Is it impossible to tell us how much that the city will end up paying throughout this term?
That would be amortized over the schedule. I mean, there are different funding sources. That might be a more appropriate question for Mr. Engel.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. No, let me take it from you for a minute. This is from our municipal advisor. Our municipal advisor provides us, if you will, the pro formas for not only our existing debt to ensure that we meet our covenants with our existing debt schedules, but also anytime that we look at new bond issues. So just, for example, what you see in red are these proposed bond issues that I'm talking about for the Bossier project. And just as a recital, we were discussing that DEQ had a very low interest program available for the sewer portion of the project, and the sewer portion of the project was added to the project in addition to the water because there was some $600,000 of mobilization cost for the river bore contractor. The DEQ loan is available only for sewer-related projects, not water. So, for example, Commissioner Williams, the sewer portion of the project, the debt service is at its most, let's just call it $359,534.
Could you repeat that one more time, Mr. England?
I'm just doing a quick look here, 359,000 approximate dollars. That's annual debt service. I didn't hear who asked the question, but 359,000.
Smith.
Oh, thank you. Councilman Smith, 359,000. So the payment on the LCDA water, 1.3 million, so we're looking at 1.695 million. If you round some of those numbers up. So what we did in the analysis was, take that debt service, match it against the price of Bossier City Water, and determine that there was some 3 million gallons a day that would need to be sold for us to cover the debt service. A very, very low number in terms of what it would take to service this debt. And for Bossier City to become I'll be careful not to use the word profitable, but for Bossier City to collect all the revenue off of the system after those 3 million gallons. As Attorney Jacobs said, you are profitable from the moment 1 gallon of water is sold off the system. After your overhead is covered, and then when we split the revenue 50-50. So I'm being very careful not to say that we have to sell 3 million gallons of water for you to become profitable. You become profitable from the moment you sell 1 gallon of water. Your overhead's covered, and you're already getting 50% of the profit after those overhead expenses are covered. So for us as a port, on our 2,000 acres before we bought, let me just say this, the initial port site was 2,000 acres. It did not take us long to sell 3 million gallons of water. And we still have several hundred acres left to develop within that campus. We still have another 2,000 acres beyond that to develop, which is where this Bossier water line is being installed to. So the probability, all the forecasts are that this is going to be a very profitable venture for Bossier City. So Commissioner Williams, in that regard, your debt service is, as I described those numbers. And we'll be glad to provide these, these are, of course, available to you.
Was it 6.5 million on the DQ loan? Is that what it was? Or-
Yes, that's correct.
So you talked about having 2 people that maybe come in here. I mean, so have you heard anything about that, or?
We're still in the running. We have. We have, to that, as we did with the city of Shreveport, we anticipate the 2,000 acres that we have recently purchased to take time. So for us as developers, we speculate, we analyze tracts of land that can meet our requirements, and then we set forth on purchasing them. As we begin to gather adjacent and non-adjacent tracts, we've master planned those sites. Now with our master planning complete, it's time to move into implementation of the infrastructure necessary to recruit these large-scale businesses. The water line is the first project. This is right out the bat what is needed in order to recruit industry. Second is the rail line. We're already underway on the design of a $25+ million railroad siding that'll measure over 2 miles in length just to serve these new 2,000 acres that we've purchased rail service, which is necessary. So for us, this is all very calculated. This is us repeating the model that we put in place beginning in the 1980s when we purchased land, when we developed the land, when we recruited tenants to the land. This isn't a first-time endeavor for the port. This is us repeating the model, which has been successful.
I've got one question, Mr. England. Do you think the project will take all 35 million?
I think I'm going to have to ask Ben for some help on that one. He's more in tune with what I would call the pricing. They do more bidding of these jobs.
Okay.
Our estimate is, now is I tell you what, let's let Ben
And
comment on
I'm sure in that 35 million, that's buying right-of-ways, anything like that y'all have to incur.
And it may, I can tell you in working with the port that they've been pretty proactive and I think put some money in the budget to aggressively pursue right-of-way and design and things like that. But we currently have the project estimated, this is for the water line, estimated at 24 million, and the sewer line estimated at a little over 6 million. So, hopefully, and I hate to use the word hope, but the market right now is a bit volatile. We've closely monitored that and update and scrub those numbers as we get more information in. But we feel comfortable with that estimate. It's got some contingency built into it, but until we, you know, take it to market and open it, we won't know.
Is there,
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
is there another $49 million on the table at the bond commission or anything like that to run water lines and easements and things like that?
I think I understand your question. Are you asking, do we have another $49 million that we're looking to issue? No.
Has already been issued?
Well, the first tranche was, we've moved ahead with a taxable portion that was part of that $49 million that went before the State Bond Commission. So of that $49 million, the first tranche was a taxable issuance for the construction, which we're out for bids on at this time, for a 40,000 square foot heavy load warehouse with triple the live load capacity of your traditional warehouse.
Is that on the 2,000 acres or on the site already in place?
It's on the site already in place. It's adjacent to 250,000 square feet of space. We have a tenant at the port that leases 310,000 square feet of space from us, and they need additional space due to their forecasts and increases in demand.
But I just have one other question, and this is just for my clarification, maybe for somebody else. We move forward with this, all the water lines are in, and, you know, nothing happens out there for 10 years. We're not responsible for anything until we start producing water out there, correct?
That is correct.
That's the only questions I had.
Until the water starts flowing, we have no obligation.
Hey, Charles, now what happens if, we get down the road, everything's going good, 10 years later, it goes south? Bossier City still don't owe no debt, do we?
Well,
We don't owe no debt, no
we
35
don't
million?
owe the debt, and there is no minimum requirement for any minimum amount of water to be produced to the port. Again, I think people are getting, you know, somewhat confused. This is not where we're taking on debt. This is where we are sharing revenue to, and have an obligation. Again, once we're satisfied, once our overhead costs are paid, then we have the obligation, depending on the production, to satisfy the port's debt service. If the portion that is obligated to the port for reimbursement of their debt service, if that amount of revenue does not cover that principal plus interest, then the city is not responsible for that. As Mr. England said, the way the agreement is drafted is, once the first gallon of water is produced, the city becomes profitable. Our overhead gets paid first. All our production costs, all our treatment costs, our personnel costs, our maintenance costs, once all those are satisfied, if there's anything left over, then it's split evenly or divided evenly between the port and the city. And the port's portion is capped at the maximum amount of their debt service.
All right, I got one more question then to add on to that. The water lines are in, everything like that. A development goes in on Highway 71 down there. We start producing water. The council allows them to tie on to that water line. Subdivision goes in, they start buying water, everything like that. Does the profit sharing off of that go into effect immediately for the port?
Correct.
Okay.
Once water is.
Once any water is produced through that
Right.
line that they are paying?
Right.
Okay.
But our overhead gets paid.
Yeah, no, I understand. I just want a clarification on that.
I wanted to ask a couple things on the project. Does the water transmitted from our plant that goes to the industrial complex ever return back to our plant? Is that, because I don't know how that works, so it never does? Okay. So how many meters are going to be located there so we know how much water we are producing, selling, or whatever?
Well, that would ultimately be up to the number of customers that the port, or tenants that the port ends up placing out there on the property. I know I've been privy to a couple of sizable developments, so you're not talking about many. I think you're talking about a handful, really, of customers. That's, I don't mean to take his thunder, but that's their intent, is to have, shovel-ready, developable property for major industrial players. So they need lots of property with lots of available utility there.
Every development, and I spoke earlier today about leased premises. So the port owns the site. We, as the Caddo Bossier Paris's Port Commission, lease sites to lessees. We define those as the leased premises. Each leased premise with a facility will have a meter in accordance with the codes, the regulations, the standards established by you. Backflow prevention, all these things that I know you all are familiar with, all of those things will be in absolute accordance with your regulations, your codes, your covenants.
Okay, so all of the meters will be in the parish of Caddo?
Will be.
Because this site, the leases will be on that property. Will the water line be the property of the city or the port?
City.
Well, before we shorten the agreement to the 40 years, the infrastructure will belong to the port.
At 99 years,
No,
but now it's 40 years,
and now it's 40 years, it will remain the property of the port.
or it's the property of the port, okay.
We do all the maintenance on it and pay for all the costs and all that.
Correct. We're responsible for the maintenance and the production and the treatment cost.
Will it ever be the property of the city?
Not pursuant to this agreement, no.
Okay,
It was, I believe in the old agreement that had the 99-year term, then it became the property of the city. However, that was the trade-off, shortening the term.
Upon the retirement of the debt, it would convey to the city of Bossier City.
Correct.
okay. Ben, do you foresee any risks, projected risks to the city regarding DEQ regulations? Like when you put in the water line and you have the other lines for future sewer, do you see any risks in that?
Or, no, sir.
None? Okay, not even if regulation change, it's not going to cause us to be more exposed?
Well, there was, we've had some dialogue regarding the sewer component, and that would be the authority that regulates wastewater treatment. And based on my assessment of the agreement that's before you here, it's very clear with the bond issue that we are not going to be treating wastewater. The port would like to have the right to come and sit down with Bossier City if at some point that makes sense. And there again, we'd be in front of you all again on the treatment side of it. But no, I don't envision there being any regulatory issues with DEQ. I can say that I stand on solid ground when it comes to Bossier's existing wastewater treatment ordinance that's established for industrial customers. That's what's cited in the code. So if and when, at some point, we had to do work within the code, or if DEQ said, look, we want industrial customers to mitigate against X, then we would be mandated to write that into our code of ordinances and update those and refresh those. But every industrial customer that currently discharges into Bossier's system, they have an industrial permit, a separate permit, and they've got to meet particular guidelines based on our code of ordinances before that water can enter our collection system and we can treat it. So I would envision that if at such point in time we were doing sewer treatment, those same guidelines would serve the citizens in the city well as far as wastewater treatment.
Okay. What does that look like? When you have a line and you put the water line in and then you put in that sewer line, what's the difference? I'm not understanding that.
Both lines are similar as far as the materials used and the techniques used. When we were looking at wastewater, and again, the port's trying to look in their crystal ball and come up with some idea of how much sewer would we anticipate. And what was communicated to us was size a line, it's large enough to handle up to 5 million gallons of wastewater a day. And so the main that's put in, that's on Exhibit D as part of the plans is sized adequately enough to provide a flow of 5 million gallons through that.
And I do appreciate the city will maintenance the water line because that's the agreement. Is the city obligated to maintenance the sewer lines even if there's no service on the line?
Yes.
In what way?
In any way that we would normally maintain a line. Now, on the sewer side, if there's no sewer going through it, there's not a whole lot of maintenance required on
But some?
mains. I think some, to go out periodically, pressure it up, make sure that there's no issues, things like that.
Okay, so when you say there's some maintenance, that means there's some costs to personnel and time and material and equipment to do that. So has that been incorporated in this, Mr.
Yes,
Jacob?
any maintenance cost to any sewer line or to any water line is defined in the agreement. And again, that would be that's what comes off the top.
Okay, so the
Before this-
expenses are, even as we speak, once this is approved, if approved, expenses will include both the water line expenses and the sewer line expenses, even though it's not in service.
Right. Any maintenance that is required on the infrastructure as described in Exhibit D.
Okay,
That's what the agreement is limited to. Those bonds and that infrastructure that is, that's why we attached Exhibit D to the project. That is what we're responsible for. However, that cost is paid first
Right.
before the revenue sharing comes in.
right, and we want that revenue to come in strong.
President Darby, might I say, to that end, the dollar amount, the price per thousand cost to the city of Bossier is not numerated. It's not quantified in this agreement per se that it has to be at this price per thousand or less. It's just whatever that cost is.
Right,
So, for example, the estimate might be 33 cents a thousand right now, just a wild number to throw in there. It doesn't say in the agreement that Bossier City's O&M costs are capped at 33 cents of your cost per thousand. It doesn't say that. It says your cost.
sure,
So if it winds up being $1 per thousand,
right,
that's what it is.
sure. It's open-ended, I understand.
It's defined.
Yeah. And I was just looking through the CEA here that you have in front of you, and the paragraph on page 5, just above prepayment. So if you look at just above that, it goes into pretty good detail on maintenance. I've looked at this and, when we've sat down, I think that the language is clear, the language protects us. We would be able to, certainly, we can't
And
just.
I can't take your opinion, I have to,
I know.
he has to say that. No, I was just teasing.
My point is that, all I've got to look at is the black and white. And we wouldn't be able to go to the port and suggest that this is what our maintenance costs are. we would have to prove those, but it's very easy. We have a very detailed, budget. And I didn't work with Eric on his numbers, but his numbers match mine exactly, as far as where he believes those debt service payments are gonna be, what our typical maintenance costs are and things like that. So, I feel comfortable within the confines of the language that what we would consider maintenance and the associated costs with that, we could easily capture as part of our quarterly, obligation to the port and demonstrate that in detail such that his finance directors and ours are comfortable with that. We look at that every month.
You mind if I jump in there real quick?
I'm done, I think.
Oh, so, I would say stupid question, but everybody's gotta have sewer. So when the new warehouses are built over there, you know, as me and you talk, it's probably gonna be years before we hook up to sewer. Are we hooking up the sewer when the warehouses are built over there? Or are we gonna hook up the Shreveport sewer?
I don't know I know that the only sewer we're putting in as part of this agreement is that line that goes underneath the river. So I'm assuming that any sewer needs out of the warehouse would be serviced by the city of Shreveport.
So if it's 3 years, and we'll know in 3 years we'll be hooking up sewer over there. After the warehouses are built, because we know they gotta have restrooms.
Yeah.
So, like we said, like you said, Ben, it's hard to push sewer from over there to our plant.
There's no way to do that.
So what's the next road? What do we do?
So my understanding, my interpretation of the agreement would be, that would be a whole different project where we sit down with the port and discuss the details. And the port has not come to the city or us to look specifically at that option as of yet. But if and when that day comes, we would make sure that, one, the administration and the council's aware, look, the port's getting serious about sending sewer to Bossier City, and that's gonna look like this. And we would go through all the minutia. But as it stands now, my interpretation is they want to keep that part of the discussion open. They would like for Bossier City to be a possible solution for their wastewater needs and their industry out there.
Well, again, it's maybe crazy, but we gotta keep it open. If he wants business over there, warehouses come to that 2,000 acres, we know they gotta have sewer. So the only way to have sewer, like you said, we can't push it over here, is to build a wastewater treatment plant. So that's another subject.
Yeah.
I don't think it's in agreement that we're gonna build it. It's in there that.
It's
you know.
not, and I really, again, I'm not an attorney, but.
I'm not trying to jump forward, but we gotta look at the future.
But the language is, in my opinion, clear. It says, notwithstanding the foregoing, it is understood and agreed, this agreement specifically contemplates Bossier City may provide wastewater treatment services to the commission and users connected to the system in the future, unless and until the governmental entities effectuate the terms and conditions of this section. This agreement only provides for the construction and maintenance of the facilities described in Exhibit D. So that's the line. So yes, it's in there. We're getting some outstanding creative financing related to that. Their debt service is less, frankly, than what I was projecting it to be. So I think we've talked about the spirit of the agreement, but it's clear, I mean, in black and white, that's the intent would be, let's keep it open and provide for future dialogue as it relates to sewer treatment.
Well, not to hammer it home, but there's no option. We can't send it to Bossier. We've already said that. So we gotta either, they hook up the Shreveport or we build a wastewater treatment plant.
Or they do.
Or, well, somebody's gotta build one.
Somebody's got to build.
You
Yeah,
know,
there's
A
options.
wastewater treatment facility will have to be built down the road. We're not there yet.
so if we have one over there, we still push it to Bossier? Or we-
I think, I hope that
Again,
one day.
this is what I'm looking at, not to interrupt you, Ben, you know I love you, but I'm looking at,
Excuse me.
2 years, we have an election. some of these guys, me, David, I don't know, we might not be here. So in 6 years or 3 years, when these things get built over there, somebody's got to build a wastewater treatment plant. And we got to figure out where it's going and how we get it over here. Now, that's more dollars.
And I think at some point, and they may already be exploring wastewater options. I'm sure that they've been working through that. I'm not the technical expert as it pertains to their wastewater needs. And I think I would like for Bossier City to be at the table when those things are being discussed. And ultimately, what's gonna govern that decision is what's best for the port, Caddo, Bossier, what decision makes the most sense to provide sewer down there? And it may be a combination of things, but we haven't explored that in detail.
But there's ways, and this is what I'm trying to get, there's ways, we know we're gonna have to build one, there's ways to get it over here,
Yes.
expensive ways, I'm sure.
The idea, Commissioner, excuse me,
That's
Councilman Williams, I
I've
work
been
for
called
commissioners. Yeah, Councilman Williams, the idea behind the funds in the cooperative endeavor agreement for the sewer line was to provide the city of Bossier an additional revenue source to your enterprise fund. This agreement, as it's if we execute it and it's carried out, you're gonna have a revenue source from water. But the idea of putting the sewer line in there was at least twofold, in that it will provide you another source of revenue off the sanitary sewer to your wastewater treatment facility. And it was also just envisioned that it made economic sense if you could borrow $6.5 million at 0.95 and also save on current dollars of a $600,000 mobilization cost. If it is not necessary, it is 100% does not have to happen with this project. We just didn't want to pass an opportunity to take advantage of that low interest financing and also save that $600,000.
I understand all that.
Okay.
But I think we all know in 3 years, if you get what you want over there, there's gonna have to be a treatment plant built. But there's no discussion needs to start instead of waiting in 3 years. I mean,
That'll be great news for us all, because if we need that treatment facility,
but it's not if, I don't think,
It's
unless you're gonna
when.
sit there at 2,000 acres that has nothing on it.
no,
so.
it's gonna be great news when we need that wastewater treatment facility, because that means industry's there and jobs are created and you all are making money off the water.
I got one more, just for Ben. Ben, what do you think this is just a guesstimate, what do you think the maintenance cost will be, once all the lines are put in? What do you think the maintenance cost will be until water is being produced? Or will there be any maintenance costs?
Minimal,
Minimal?
yeah. I mean, the main costs are gonna be, sorry,
Don't mean to interrupt, you got a 2-year maintenance bond,
true.
so
Okay.
with any construction project, and, quite possibly if you, anyway, you got a 2-year maintenance bond.
That's a good point.
And
Does that include, David, the one under the river too?
yes,
absolutely.
it's everything, so the performance and payment bond would be in place for the entire project, water and sewer, upon substantial completion and acceptance of the project. Under the performance and payment bond, when that contract is fulfilled, the 2-year maintenance bond is implemented. So from that point, not the date of construction, the date of substantial completion, there would be a 2-year maintenance bond, which would guarantee that the contractor
Hey, you just have to pay.
warranty, any and all items that had to be repaired, so.
We did that on a water line.
And Councilman Williams, if I may,
You
there's
may.
nothing in this specific agreement that obligates the city to build any, or to, not to, nothing, the port's gonna build everything, but to maintain and operate anything that is not contained in Exhibit D. So if it does make sense in the future for Bossier City to treat wastewater, that would be the subject of a brand-new agreement. And of course, the city would have to, investigate that, do their due diligence, evaluate that, and then strike a deal with the port that would, that's mutually advantageous to both entities.
Oh, I understand that. I was bringing it up because it hasn't been spoken about, okay? It's either us or Shreveport. That's the only two options you got.
Or private,
Yeah.
or the port.
Our proximity to the river is advantageous in that regard.
But if you use our line, I mean, we'd be charging you for that. Even if you build again, it's common sense, you have to have one.
I think it was best stated that we will cross that bridge down the road through a separate agreement. It'll be covered, but not obligated in this agreement.
We did, Councilman Williams, when working with the port on the servitude agreements, those were structured in a way to provide for an additional sewer main to go through there. So there's been some forethought that if the ultimate solution is to pump water from the port to the Red River Treatment Plant, that there would be facilities available to do that. But that is not part of this
Yeah.
CEA, and it's not part of the project, but we, in such that they don't have to go back to the trough and do that again, we tried to crystal ball gaze a little bit on what that would look like.
If I might make a quick suggestion. If it is the intent of the port to be made whole, even if it happens after the retirement of the debt, again, I think it's safe to assume nobody up here will be here when that happens, that should be in writing, because we should not commit to the future council and future mayors that they will continue to pay after the debt service is retired. I think that's,
Yeah, we have no obligation to pay anything to the port once that debt service is retired.
I understand that, but it was stated by the port that is the intent, so,
It is. It is. There is no, in the spirit of the agreement, there is no payment to the port after the debt service is retired. There's no payment from you all to us after debt service is retired.
okay, but that's not what was said at the last workshop, which is, I guess, where my confusion's coming in at.
Well,
Because the
let's
last
work that out.
workshop, it was clearly said that even if it happens after the debt's retired, we expect to be made whole. And so that's where
Okay.
I'm getting confused at, if that's,
Okay? If the debt is retired, there is no payment.
okay.
Yeah, if the debt is retired, the bonds are paid in full. And by agreement, there's no payment to be made. We will not be looking for Bossier City to make any payments to the port after debt service is retired. In the discussion at the time, there was a term of 99 years, and I believe, if you will, the area of discussion was, what if during the debt service term, the full amount has not been paid? Then the payments would extend beyond debt service. But because we've made the changes to make the agreement more beneficial to Bossier City by it only being 40 years, if in that scenario, after 30 years of debt service payments by the port, and in that time, the payments from Bossier City to the port did not equal the debt service, and a period of 10 more years go by where you still didn't make that, you're able to walk away. You are able to walk away without any obligation, any ownership, any ties to the line. You made the agreement more beneficial to Bossier City as a result of the last workshop, in that not a dollar of payment will be made from Bossier City to the port beyond the debt service. Period.
Okay, council, we have about 30 minutes left before 4 PM. I can open the floor for any public input at this time, unless someone else has something to ask.
I'm done.
Okay, thanks. We're going to open the floor for public comments. Thank you, Mr. England. We have one right here.
Councilman, if I don't have another opportunity, again, we appreciate the opportunity for this dialogue and the opportunity. These are agreements that are meaningful for the future of our communities. We on behalf of the Port Commissioners, appreciate this opportunity to flesh out all the details. You all have my cell phone number. If not, I know the clerk can provide it to you. Please feel free to call me. Be glad to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And I appreciate your willingness to have this dialogue and your transparentness. It's government should have this more often, so thank you.
No doubt. And it's what's gotten these types of agreements we've entered into, it's proved beneficial. So we're following the model that was set forth by the folks before us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How are y'all doing? David Crockett, 653 Dumaine Drive, Bossier City, Louisiana. I have a kind of a question. I don't know if you can address it right now, but has anybody run this cooperative endeavor through the Bond Commission or Louisiana Treasurer? Because there's a requirement to do so. Has anybody done that yet?
What's the requirements?
Well, it hasn't been done because it hasn't been executed yet.
Well,
And
I
so
think
all the requirements of the bond commission and the state law requirements will be satisfied if in fact the city, in the purview of the council, if there's a vote, to enter into this agreement, then all that due diligence will be done by the port's bond counsel.
okay. Well, I did look, and you may have an answer.
Yeah, sure.
But I don't want this to run into my 3 minutes because I have a couple of comments.
Councilman.
Let me go ahead and make one comment, or either way.
Councilman, so this matter has gone before the State Bond Commission, and in our interactions with the State Bond Commission, the focus was on the port's financials, because we have to stand alone on this issuance in the event that no payment whatsoever is made from Bossier City to the port. That's highly unlikely, but this stands alone on the port's debt coverage ratio alone. It does not require those payments from the city for it to stand on its own. Therefore, a review of the agreement is not germane to the conversation.
Well, I differ with what was just said because there's a public notice on the treasurer's website, and it would be very informative for everybody on the council to read about it. It talks about some of the exact same things that we're talking about. Building something that may not, in the end, belong to the city, all the things about cooperative endeavor agreements. It's addressed, I think, in September of 2022, but I'm just recommending that you go and review that. And it makes it pretty clear that this is an obligation, if it's an obligation of the city to pay for something, that it is something that we have to be, or the Bossier City has to be concerned about as far as total debt, because it is an obligation to pay. I think that's what's come out
It
in
is,
this.
with all due respect, Mr. Crockett, it is not an obligation to pay anything. That is.
May I have my time, please,
That is just
Mr. President?
misinformation.
I mean, if you want to debate, give me 10 minutes. You know.
I'm going to give you a little bit more time anyway. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think in the long run for the city, you've already covered the points where it is an issue of concern to the city that it may not be the city's bond, but when you read the commission's paper that I'm talking about, you'll find very clearly that it addresses almost everything that you guys are talking about in this cooperative endeavor. And it does have to be run through the bond commission before you approve it and go for it. But anyway, you can shake your head all you want, but thank you for letting me have a comment. I think one of the other things that has not happened, and I've asked for it a couple of times, The total debt payment structure needs to be disclosed to the public. I've asked for that twice, and frankly, I've been treated kind of rudely about that, but I think you as councilmen need to know what that payment structure is going to be. Because if you start selling 1,000 or whatever, 1 million gallons a day, whatever you start selling and you start having to pay this, you have to be aware of what all those payments are, because that's an obligation to the city, whether it's your bond or not. And it, like I said in the first meeting, it will need to be disclosed in your financial reports, because it is an obligation that the city is paying it to the port, however it's billed. It may not be the city's bond, but it does count, and it will affect your credit. It will have to. It'll have to be covered in a note or something in the city's CAFRs. So anyway, thank you for letting me talk.
Thank you. Well, the good
And I'm
news.
sorry to interrupt you, what you're saying.
The
Mr.
good news, Mr. Crockett, before you came in, we did address the structure of payment, and it's on the record, we have that. And I think the clerk will look up that site and let the council become aware of that in the future, before our next council meeting.
But we have the letter from our
Already, yeah.
from our
but just-
CPA, the people that
Yeah,
do
our
our
bond.
financial
Auditor.
review every year, and they said, should I read our audit every year? Would you
Yeah,
like me to read that
that's
again
something you
since
missed also.
you missed?
We did.
Well,
get
and
an
I'm sorry,
opinion.
I'm sorry I missed it. So just for me to be understand, so the council right now has a view of every year's payment structure that would be required once it started. Is that,
Yeah.
and can the public have it? Is that it?
I think it is public. Is
Is
it
it
not,
public?
Mr. England?
Every document
Yeah, I
we
thought so.
have.
Okay.
Well, I had, in preparing for the last workshop, it wasn't in there, and I've been asking to get the payment structure, the total payment, principal and interest every year for 35 years.
Okay.
Because a 4.9, even if it's a 4.9% average rate on your bonds, as was talked about in one of the meetings, 4.9% on a 35-year bond is a lot of money. You're gonna be paying much more than double the initial principal.
It's a
But
40-year, yeah.
Oh,
But it-
no, I think the bond was
Oh, the
gonna be
bond
for
itself.
35, right?
Let me get the
Oh.
clerk to read that
Thank
statement
you.
for you, so you can hear that for yourself. Go
We're
ahead.
talking about what
This
from
one.
here.
Herb
And also-
McRoy Investor.
Yes, sir. And also, Mr. Crockett, you said you've been asking for it. Have you done a public records request to ask for it?
No, I asked for it in the meetings. I thought it ought to be a part of the
This-
public discussion, not something, because whenever I've asked for anything, now I know I need to get back to Mr. Jacobs on one of my other ones, but, you know, you're not gonna get it immediately. It'll be after your workshop before I ended up getting it
Right,
usually.
but according to RS 4214 of the state of Louisiana, this is a public comment period, not a question and answer.
I-
So that's
I'm
why I'm
not
asking, did you
disputing
ask for a
that.
public records request on
I'm
that?
not disputing that. I just, two times in the meetings, I said the public should have this, we should put it as one of the attachments that you can openly go to for the meeting, so I can look at it and talk about it. Then we can write about it credibly, and then the council gets the advice and consent of everybody, not just what you're seeing there. So that's all I'm saying.
Thank you, Mr.
But God
Crockett.
bless. Thank you all. Appreciate
Go
it.
ahead and read that,
To
please.
whom it may concern, this is dated March 21st, 2023, should the city of Bossier enter into a cooperative endeavor agreement with the Port Commission, with the commission covering the cost of said project, said agreement would not result in any debt being assessed to the city as per the CEA. The city is not responsible for the payment of said bonds. The debt is the sole responsibility of the commission, with the city having the responsibility to make payments to the port after the city's production and treatment costs are satisfied. Said payment to the commission is capped at the commission's debt service. However, the commission is solely responsible for the bonded indebtedness. And it's signed by Jared Tinsley, a partner at Hurd McElroy Industrial LLC, and that's who does our city audits.
Okay, and you're welcome to a copy of this, Mr. Crockett. Now I want the attorney to have his turn to rebuttal or what he wanted to say earlier.
This has been misconstrued by whatever source. The city, this is not debt on the city's books, because the city is not responsible for any of this bonded indebtedness. What this is, and quite frankly, I mean, it's very advantageous to the city in the legal sense of the way the agreement has been drafted. It is a revenue sharing agreement. The port is going to bond, pay for, and build the infrastructure. What we have is a maintenance agreement and a revenue sharing agreement. Once our overhead costs are met, production, treatment, maintenance, all those things that we do on a daily basis anyway, once all those expenses are met, then the revenue, any extra revenue will be divided evenly between the port and the city, with the port's portion of that revenue capped at the quarterly amount of its debt service. If the city does not produce enough water to meet the port's debt service, then the city is not responsible for that difference. If the city does satisfy the quarterly revenue or the quarterly debt service of the port, then anything produced after that is, and that's that 3 million gallon number, then the city keeps 100% of the revenue. But in no way, shape, form, or fashion is the city responsible for any principal or interest payment on the bonds that the port, that will be issued, and sold by the port to finance the project. I mean, it can't get any more simpler than that. It's just.
Clear as mud, right?
Yes, sir.
All right, anyone else? We're going to shut it down.
Well, one
Yes, sir.
quick recommendation as to an assertion that was made at the podium. I would ask Mr. Jacobs to reach out to Foley and Udell, our bond counsel, which everyone is familiar with, as well as governmental consultants. We hire these professionals, just as we hire CPAs to affirm our position in what has been asserted, not by certain individuals, but by representation of our counsel, Mr. Jacobs, Mr. Rauschenbach, and Mr. England. So I think that would go a long way to assert that we, the council, are in an affirmative position, that we are relying on true and tried decisions that are made, and that we're going to adhere going forward if in fact this CEA agreement in partnership with the port is approved next Tuesday. So with y'all's concurrence in this workshop, I would like to ask Mr. Jacobs to seek those opinions, please.
Good recommendation. The chair, on behalf of the city council, would like to thank Mr. England for being here and thank the public for their participation. And of course, we thank you, Ben, for making us understand things that's above our pay grade. And we do the best,
above.
we do the best we can. And always, we thank Phyllis for her diligent in research, because we rely on her a lot to help us to understand the fine print as well. So we do appreciate her. So council, that being said, the workshop is over.